Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good evening. I just wanted to make a few of my thoughts on this article that I came across. I came across actually a few days ago, and I just haven't had time to address it till now. But it says the feds warn of tipping point in public support for immigration levels. Support for immigration policy drops when Canadians are told how many new arrivals there are each year. So pretty much as it stands, off this byline, it should be concerning to most people because it shows how misinformed the Canadian public is. For the most part, Canada's always had this appearance of a multicultural society, an open society, a society that's tolerant to immigrants. Now, I guess it's probably been about the last 40 or 50 years since something like that's been put in place, since the years of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. That was really when Canada was considered a multicultural society. So you can thank Trudeau Sr. for that. And Trudeau Jr. is just continuing his father's legacy with all the immigration that he's bringing in. But as it stands, most people say that they think that the amount of immigrants being brought in is about right, as the article says. But everybody who was told about that believed that it was under 150,000 immigrants a year. Now, 150,000 is a large number as it stands per year for immigrants. And especially when we consider the fact that a large portion of immigrants in Canada, especially if we're talking first-generation immigrants, live off government assistance. And so the welfare system we're talking about. And they don't tend to get off it. Now, I can't remember the exact number. It's either just above or just below 50% of first-generation immigrants. But that's a lot. And most people think it's about right, but they also think it's under 150,000 immigrants a year. In fact, the real number is over 260,000 over the last few years. So over 250,000 immigrants every single year over the last few years. That is a lot. That is a shit ton of immigrants to be bringing in. And it's really unnecessary. There's no reason to be bringing in this many immigrants. But that is where we stand. And after everything we've already just said, we mentioned about that. It says that... Sorry, I lost my position. About 30% of Canadians think immigrant levels are too high. There's a cluster of people who are simply opposed. At the other extreme, there are another group who are super keen. The government released its 3-year immigration strategy late last year, which plans for incremental increases to immigration levels over the next 3 years. But many immigration advocates and economic groups, including the federal government's own Economic Advisory Council, had called for more significant increases. More increases than what we have now. And the plan as it stands is calling for 1 million immigrants over the next 3 years. That is Trudeau's plan. What he wants to do. What the government wants to do. But these groups, these advocacy groups and economic groups, they're saying that it's not enough. Now, if we're talking economic groups, I can only see these as shitty fucking monopoly corporate businessmen who only want to flood the industry and pay people as little as possible. Cheap labor is what they're looking for if there actually are economic groups. But if we're talking about the average business owner, this is not going to be something that they probably support. I could be wrong on that, but I don't actually think the average business owner is advocating the government for more immigration. And it's even saying our Economic Advisory Council is calling for more. Well, when we're talking about the Liberal government's Economic Advisory Council, considering how they are marred in postmodernism bullshit, and I would not trust their word at all. This is part of the reason I don't trust government to begin with. But this is concerning, and it also shows the detachment that our government has to the rest of us. Our government clearly is not listening to the people. The Trudeau government doesn't care what the people want, what the populist platform wants, because even when the majority of Canadians are against them, and that would include supporters of Trudeau. If the majority of Canadians are against a decision he made, or makes he's making a dumbass out of himself, then these are also Trudeau's supporters. A good example of this was Trudeau's trip to India. Because Very, very few Canadians thought it was a good trip. Most thought it was a fucking disaster. And Trudeau goes on the defensive, and he's pretty much saying that it was sabotage and deliberate bad press. I actually don't know if they said it was deliberate bad press, but essentially sabotage by the Indian government, instead of owning up that he fucked up, that the government fucked up. And anytime the government fucked up, they won't own up to it. Their biggest thing is to make reference to the Harper years over one thing or another. So the government is way out of touch with the people, or it's deliberately out of touch. And this is the problem with the current Liberal government, is they don't actually care. They just have their agenda and they're sticking to it. But maybe, just maybe, some of this resentment towards the immigration levels are coming because we also had, in early this year, it was January 29, 2018, this article comes out, nearly 2,000 illegal border crossings stopped by RCMP in December. Now, stopped by RCMP, you mean they acted as their bellhops and carried their luggage. This has been a problem since last year, and even though we really don't hear much about it, it's still going on. Now, for those who don't remember, it really started to take place. This was always like, we had trickling numbers, but they were usually very small. But now, as it stands, what ended up happening is after Trump took away the temporary protective status for the Haitians last year, somewhere around summertime, I believe, if I remember correctly, we started to see a large influx of immigrants rushing towards our border. This was also because right around the same time, our prime minister put out a dumbass tweet saying that anybody fleeing persecution is welcome to Canada without even thinking about this. And now all these people are claiming that they're fleeing persecution from America, which also goes against, I cannot remember the treaty right now, actually. I'm sorry, I can't remember the treaty, but we have a treaty signed with America where if somebody arrives in North America, between our two countries, Canada and America, if they file for refugee status, they have to file for refugee status in the country they first land in. And so if they land in America first, they have to file a refugee status with America, and they cannot file refugee status with Canada. I cannot remember if Mexico is also involved in this, but as far as I know, it's just Canada and America. And I think the treaty was called the Safe Third World Act, if I remember correctly. So these are exactly these refugees were doing, these Haitians were doing. They had their temporary protective status taken away, which means they were more at risk of being deported. They had to go through more official immigration status or apply for citizenship in order to stay, but many of them probably wouldn't get it. So they fled up here. And we saw a large influx of immigrants coming across the border. And when that ended up happening, we were ill-equipped to prepare with it. They ended up sending up tent cities around the crossing in Quebec. They had to ship some out. There was over 1,000 living in the crumbling Olympic Stadium in Montreal, that one from back in, 1980 or something like that? 84 maybe? And is a crumbling mess, but that's where they were staying. So we literally set up slums. We set up slums on the Canadian-American border. These people need to be cared after. The Canadian government was caring after them. They provided them with money, food, shelter. And when winter came, well, these people needed somewhere warmer to stay than a fucking tent. So we had to build portables or cabins of some sort in order for these people to live throughout the winter. And even though it was cold and it was the winter, that didn't stop people from going across the border. They continued. As we see here, 2,000 illegal border crossings in December. So it says, new figures from the federal government show 1,978 people were stopped by the RCMP, up from 1,623 the month before. So that was in November. Altogether, over 49,000 claims for asylum were filed in 2007, the statistics show. The last time more than 40,000 claims were filed in Canada in a single year was 2001. Yeah, we skyrocketed in the amount of people who filed for asylum with Canada. It's unbelievable. And instead of doing something about it, Trudeau is just letting them stay. But what we should have done is when they crossed the border, they should have been driven to an official border crossing, and they should have been handed back to the American authorities, because that's how it works. Right now, they are underneath America's jurisdiction, not Canada's. They're crossing the border illegally. And Though the solution that the Trudeau government had was to make it an official border crossing. That doesn't help anything. But as we see here, more recent articles. Quebec sees surge in border crossing. 600 entered last weekend. This was at the beginning of this month, April 5th. About 150 people cross each day. That's triple the usual numbers of 50 to 60 immigrants per day. That's enough. 50 to 60 per day. But unlike last year, when thousands of Haitian immigrants were housed in the Montreal Stadium, the new group is predominantly from Nigeria. Now, excuse me, but Nigeria is a fucking shithole. I don't know if that's even worth bringing up, but that's why I believe in vetting certain people. If we don't know who these people are coming in, we don't know if these people have a criminal record, and plenty of times people who cross borders illegal like this, they do. That doesn't mean the majority of them, but there's probably enough of them crossing our border right now who have criminal records. More recently, April 6th, Canadian border officials prepare for another spike in illegal border crossings. The RCMP intercepted more than 3,000 irregular border crossings in January and February, part of a total number of 7,800 asylum seekers processed by the Federal Immigration Department and the Canada Border Service Agency during the same time period. Maybe this is why people are starting to reach the breaking point when it comes to immigration. Maybe it's because the government is doing nothing about it, and many of them are living off the government too, our taxpayer system, and are not paying the taxes as well. On top of this, Trudeau has done nothing to curb anybody crossing the border. All he's done is tweeted out that, hey, stop it, we're not going to take everybody. But in the 2018 budget, he put $200 million towards processing illegal immigrants at the border. He's not going to be sending any of them back. And one of the main reasons, especially when they do things like this, you can't help but figure, is the fact that many of these people are going to be voting on the left-wing government. So if he brings them in, makes them permanent residents, gives them citizenships, allows them to stay, they're more likely to vote for his government. This is really what I think it is these days, is that the left-wing parties cannot get much votes from the citizenry. They still do. They still have some strong points. But in a lot of areas that are dominated by citizens, they don't win those votes. They do not. So this is the point that the Trudeau government has gotten to. They've gotten to the point where this is actually, they don't want to put an end to these border crossings, and that's why they want to carefully manage any debates on immigration, because bringing in these many immigrants helps them. It helps them win their votes, essentially. And it also helps them water down certain demographics, certain swing ridings. They can start putting people in there who will vote towards the liberal cause. And when you vote towards the liberal cause in a swing riding, that suddenly turns it from a purple riding into a red riding. So this is really why I think that Trudeau is not willing to do anything in terms of immigration, and why he's barely doing anything. And because of it, many Canadians are reaching their breaking point. But instead of actually addressing this and seeing why the citizenry might be upset with this, Trudeau is just going to say that we have to carefully manage debates. That's it. He wants them carefully managed because he knows that right now in an open debate about immigration, they would get pulverized because people are done. We're done. Unfortunately, what's going to end up happening if Trudeau and the rest of the Liberals still won't listen to the people, and especially if they got in for another 4 years and continued this type of leadership, which of course they would if they got in for another 4 years, if they won 2019 election, then we would actually see a much bigger rise in fringe groups, right-wing groups, far right-wing groups, because the citizens will just feel that they're not represented at all by their current government, and they're going to go to a very nationalistic party. Now, I'm not against nationalism in and of itself, but a heavy nationalistic party maybe be good. Right now, I wouldn't be too thrilled about a super heavy nationalistic party. A little bit of nationalism is no problem here. Patriotism always good, but when it goes too far, it can get ugly. But anyway, that's just really my take on the whole immigration, this whole immigration article. Thanks very much, guys. Have a great night.